hope you're feeling groovy as we're about to review another movie. Today, we have Derrick McDuff join us again as we review Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring. Derrick, the first time you watched this movie, what was your overall impression of this movie?
Oh man, I was young when I saw this movie. I was like a kid. I was like 11 years old when this movie came out. It's hard to remember because it was so long ago, but I remember there was just being so much hype for it, right? And I was, like a big old like little nerd back then, and I was really like, okay, this looks right up my alley. Like I'm down. And I remember seeing like the first time I actually watched any of it, I was like, for some reason, it was just on inside of a Toys R Us. Like they had it just like playing the whole movie. And I remember seeing like a chunk of it, like I was like, oh man, this looks cool, but I don't. It was like towards the end, it was like when they get to like the boats at the end in Hen, and I was like, all right, this looks good. But I was like, I'll save it and I'll watch it. And I just remember watching the whole thing. My family rented the VHS at the time, and we watched it, and we fucking loved it. And then I was like, all right, cool. I'm gonna like go. And then from then on, I was like, I went and saw the second one. I saw the third one in theaters, like I multiple times for both of them. And I was just so into it. Like I could not believe how cool it was, and just how like intricately crafted, and like with how much care and love and devotion they put into this fantasy world and the world building that was going on, and how everyone involved in it, from the director to like the set designers, all the way down like the actors, everyone like really cared about this, and such meticulous care was put into everything. Would just hand make all the things. There was this is the second one, but in Theoden has like a piece of his armor that on the inside you can see. There's like they put all these things on the inside with like these little sun emblems that no one's ever going to see in the movie, but they did it just because they had that attention to detail and that attention to craft and making this huge world. And that compelled me so much. But what also compelled me was how interesting these characters were. Like I was really like, oh wow, like this is cool. These sword fights are cool. Like this action is cool. This like the elves are interesting. But I cared about Aragorn. I cared about Frodo. I cared about Pippin. I cared about Legolas. I cared about all of these guys. And just they all feel so cool and distinct, and you care about their individual arcs. And that's the whole point of this movie. Even though it is this grand big epic that you don't really see anymore, you don't see epics made on this scale, it is still about like the quest of the smallest person, like the littlest person. Hobbits, these seemingly insignificant little guys, make the biggest difference in this ultimate war versus evil. And that's what's so cool about these movies, is it manages to be both very, very big, but also incredibly personal.
So you don't think they make epics anymore. So did you not feel like Chronicles of Narnia and Star Wars, before Disney bought them, were epics?
Well, I mean, those came out around the same time as, the Star Wars was like the 70s days, and then the prequels were 99 to 2005, and Narnia started in 2005. So it was around the same era. I don't know if I would call those epics. They were definitely big, huge action movies. Maybe Narnia was trying to go for that same epic feel. I think maybe the only thing that's come out recently that's an epic, there's been a lot more sci-fi epics than historical or fantasy epics. And I would say Dune is an epic for sure. A lot of them have failed, so I'm really glad that Dune was a big box office success, even in a year when, most things failed at the box office for obvious reasons. So I think that maybe there are some sci-fi epics that are coming out right now. Star Wars, I guess, the original one might classify as that, but Dune is on even like a bigger scale. And a lot of epics, I think, are maybe more going to TV. Like you see Game of Thrones is like a really big epic, that's kind of, in this age of prestige TV, Game of Thrones kind of carved out a new space for that. And then that's where Lord of the Rings itself is going, is there's going to be that new Lord of the Rings TV show, which like cost $1 billion or something insane like that. So I think that is kind of the trend we're seeing now when it comes to epics.
So why do you feel like making more epics for TV shows, but when they try and fail to make an epic in a movie, it just does not work as well anymore, doesn't stick.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think TV and movies are kind of like changing their dynamics, as what they were like 10, 20 years ago, before the rise of like this kind of like TV was just kind of very episodic, and you just kind of like told like a one little story, and that was it. It was like an episode of the Brady Bunch, and it didn't matter that Marsha had braces in one episode, she had them off. The next episode, no one ever commented on it. But now TV is very, very much serialized. You are telling these larger stories that are driven by interesting characters, which I think lends itself very well to epics. Like, they're becoming a lot more expensive. And so you are getting things like these. Everybody kind of wants to have their new Game of Thrones. So you're getting, the Lord of the Rings show, you're getting Foundation, you're getting all these. There's a bunch more that are coming out that I'm just like forgetting about, like sci-fi and fantasy epics. And since you are able to tell these kind of like longer form stories, I think that lends itself really well to the epic, because the epic is long. It is this big, long story. And in movies, when they were like you would, the epics you would get that were the best were a lot of times there were these long movies, like 4-hour movies and stuff, which don't really get made anymore. And when you did get those epics, even Lord of the Rings, they were still like close to 3 hours, 4 hours long if you count the extended editions. They were split over multiple films. Even Dune is basically just half a movie. That's my one critique of it, is it doesn't really have anything. It just feels like the first half of a movie. So the fact that it's long form storytelling, it lends itself really well to TV, where you can break it up into these chunks and just kind of do it that way. Maybe that's the reason.
That, and I feel like a lot of times with TV shows, a lot easier to invest in that world because you're more part of it.
Yeah, the more time it gives you to spend in this world, the more you feel comfortable with it. You don't have to, you can kind of dole out information can tell you one thing in one episode and something else in the next episode. You don't get all these big information dumps where you're like, what's going on with these guys? Who is this faction? What's going on with this? Why do these people hate these people? And, when it is kind of like doled out more naturally, more slowly, that does lend itself nicely to TV. Yeah, you got a good point there.
You said earlier that you don't feel like Lord of the Rings is overly praised at all, that it's got what it deserved. And what do you think made it so good? You said about them having the passion and they wanting to make it. I don't remember reading the book. How does the movie correlate to the book that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote?
Okay, so I still need to read the books. I haven't read the book. I tried to in high school. I got halfway through the first one. I read The Hobbit. The Hobbit's an easy read. The Lord of the Rings are not easy reads. Lord of the Rings are dense, and there's a lot of just characters who are just kind of like thrown in out of nowhere, and you're like, who is this guy? What do they mean? It's a really hard read. I need to go back and try it. I think the movies do a really good job of translating this kind of impossible task of like giving you all of this information, because they don't overload you with stuff. They don't tell you every single aspect of the world. You get hints that there is this larger history, there is this really larger world and this deep mythology, and you hear names that are like touched on in the books, like Morgoth and stuff, but they don't need to tell you the entire history of Morgoth and Sauron and stuff like that. You just kind of have this prologue where like he like was defeated like 3,000 years ago or whatever. His ring is in the river. Gollum got it, and now he's trying to get back. Like, it gives you the essentials. Does that very, very effectively. And I think, it does that really well. It focuses a lot on the characters, which I think maybe some epics recently have not done as well, where they're really focused on giving you these cool, really interesting worlds, but they forget to occupy it with characters that are relatable and interesting and flawed too. That's the thing, is Boromir is this incredibly flawed character, but he really, really is trying to do the right thing at all times. Like, his selfishness is fueled by just kind of like an innate corruption in all of men, which it kind of hints at, like everybody kind of has this in them. And that's kind of the thing that Aragorn fears the most, is he's going to be like Isildur, his ancestor, and just kind of try and take the ring for himself. Aragorn sees in Boromir the worst stuff that is potentially within himself. And Boromir, sees that within himself too. But still, whenever Boromir does something, like he talks about, we should take the ring, it's not because he just wants it because he's evil. He wants it because he was like, we should use this to protect Gondor. We should use this to protect our people. And that's why there's some strife between him and Aragorn, is that the two are, Aragorn kind of like shirked his responsibilities of being king. And Boromir is kind of, the steward. And at first he's just kind of like, we don't need a king. But then he's like, we could ride in together. We could be the Lords of Gondor together and ride in, protect our people. And Aragorn's still like, no. And then finally, after Boromir has this great moment where he fails completely, he tries to take the ring from Frodo, and the worst parts of himself come out. And he redeems himself, though, when he dies fighting to protect Merry and Pippin, and he gets shot by 3 arrows. And, Aragorn and him have this moment where Boromir is just dying, and he just is like, they are like my men of Gondor. And I think that's kind of one of the things that it's this first step in Aragorn's character arc of him just kind of growing to be the king that he knows he should be. The movie does really well is, while it is a big action movie with these cool battles and sword fights and stuff that I loved when I was like 11, I first saw this movie, it also has these moments that stand the test of time where you are on these journey with these characters that you deeply care about.
That's a valid point, and that's something that I struggle a lot watching newer movies, because there's not that character in depth and very much stuff anymore. And I like stuff being character driven.
Like, I think that was one of my problems with Dune, is that the character, like, at least to Paul, was not an interesting, engaging guy. I think there definitely is a lot of stuff in movies with character work. That's one thing where I was really surprised that Spider-Man No Way Home, I thought that character development in that was really strong. A lot of stuff that I thought was just going to be really fan servicey. Then bringing in the other Spider-Man, I was like, okay, whatever, they're just going to bring them in. No one's going to care. But the characters in that, I felt like there was really interesting stuff. It made me care about Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man a lot. So it is a rare thing, I think, in blockbusters, but every once in a while, you do get a Lord of the Rings, you do get a Spider-Man No Way Home where it is able to do both things and it clicks really well. A lot of times, though, that is kind of relegated to, especially like you were saying more recently with the big budget movies, it is the kind of smaller independent movies, or not even independent, but just kind of like small budget movies. Something like that came out this year that I thought was a really good character study was Cop Shop. Not a lot of people saw that this year, but that was a really good movie. I'd recommend that to anybody.
I've been starting to reach out to different indie makers, and I've been watching a lot more indie films than I ever have before. And that is one thing that I am starting to like about indie films, because they don't have this massive typical Hollywood budget. They are enforced to, in a way, tell a story centered around the characters. And sometimes that's a lot better than these high budget movies.
Yeah, something that came out this year that I think straddles that line really well is David Lowry's The Green Knight, which was definitely one of my favorite films of the year, where it's a mid-budget fantasy movie. It's an A24 movie, so it's not a huge scale like Lord of the Rings, but it is still has enough of a budget to have these really cool fantasy moments. And it is just a very, very interesting character study. And it's small enough that it's allowed to be just really, really weird. Like, it's a weird ass movie.
Like, how weird?
Oh man. Like, it's a lot. Like, I remember when I walked out of it, I walked out with the person I saw it with, and I was like, was that good? I think that was good. But like, it's just like, there's moments in it, you're like, what happened? Like, why? Like, there's some weird sexual stuff in it, and it's just like you're like, what was that scene about? And just like, there's all this, it's very much like, feels like an old, like, Middle Ages poem where you're like, what is the meaning of this allegory here? Like, why does this character just show up for a scene and then leave and then kiss this guy, and then they go off over here and then they say some weird poem over here to this guy? So, and apparently the original cut wasn't like that. It was still probably weird, but David Lowry, he had like a year to recut it because it got delayed because of the pandemic, and it was just like, no, I'm gonna make my movie. Like, I'm just gonna make it as weird as I want. So I was really happy to see that. It was just, I love David Lowry. He's one of my favorite directors. So I was really happy when I saw The Green Knight.
That's another thing about Lord of the Rings, is I did feel like there were times where it had like wasted screen time, but you're so invested in these characters that you don't really care. I went to go see the new Kingsman movie recently with a friend, and it's just so much wasted screen time and so poorly written. That's just been with a lot of new movies lately. Not all, but a lot of them.
Yeah, I think Peter Jackson, there's obviously scenes that are just like they're only for character moments that don't move the story along. That I think he did cut a lot of those out, and a lot of those are back in the extended. And I do actually prefer the extended editions with those scenes. And like from the second one, the scene where Aragorn and Eowyn have the soup and it's like the horrible soup. And that scene doesn't really do anything, but it gives you a really like as far as like moving the story forward, it is this really nice moment that gives you an interesting insight into both of their characters as well as it sets up their dynamic really well going forward, kind of gives you a little more information on that. And it also gives you kind of some like interesting world building and some interesting background. It's like, because you don't know in the movies that Aragorn is actually like 87 and he's part of this Dune Dine, which lives super long, because that never gets touched on in the theatrical cuts. But it's a nice little moment that they put in where in the extended edition where they just give you this information. It doesn't do anything, doesn't tell you anything. Like the fact that he is like 87 makes no difference on anything that happens in the story, but it's a cool little moment to have. And I think that was something that, these movies got to do that was unique, is they had to have a kind of, theatrical edition that's a more streamlined movie. But then if you want to have your at home experience where you're like, okay, I'm going to like binge all these movies back to back and have a full Lord of the Rings day, you get that extra stuff in the extended editions, and you can kind of choose whichever one you want, which I think is a unique thing for these movies.
For sure. And that's what I was meaning, was like Peter Jackson is able to make what usually would feel like wasted screen time to not feeling wasted, because you're already like feeling like you're there with the characters. Whereas in a lot of other movies, if you not have that connection with the characters, then it just feels like it's dragging.
Yeah, his exposition and his like, quieter scenes managed to feel interesting, in a very, I think Spielberg also does that really well, or at least he did back in the day, where you are getting this information and you are getting these character building moments. But it, like you said, it doesn't feel like wasted time. It feels like, more interesting stuff.
One thing that Peter Jackson does quite well that I don't see done a whole lot is you have these sometimes 5-10 minute fight scenes, but it doesn't feel like it's too long. And then I've seen a lot of movies where have 5-10 minute fight scenes and it just feels like it went on too long. And so I felt like Peter Jackson, I don't know what he did, but he did something really good to not make it boring and keep it like interesting and intense and exciting.
Absolutely. And I think it was Patrick Willems who was saying that like action movies are a lot like musicals in the way that every once in a while you need to have the story kind of just like stop. There needs to be this thing happen where, in a musical, it's somebody sings a song, and in an action movie, somebody fights. And in the good ones of both of those, these are still driving the story. The story doesn't actually stop. It's like the fight scene is continuing, but it's moving the story forward. And they're not in a musical, they're singing a song that's relevant to what's going on. They're not just singing to sing. And
Right.
in these movies, they are very much like, okay, like this fight is happening, but it's still character development, character things are still happening. I think the plot is still moving forward. We're not stopping because it's been 30 minutes. It's not like a Michael Bay movie where it's like, oh, we need to have Optimus punch this thing now. It feels like an actual, there's reasons for these to go forward. And I think this one is even maybe the best in that regard, because it doesn't feel like it has this whole climactic, like big battle scene. It is just a more, the final battle that you get at the end of this one is just between a small group of people than the Fellowship. And so it is a lot more intimate. And, that final fight scene, like, is so powerful, especially since, Boromir dies at the end of it. And it is this really emotional beat, when he gets hit by those arrows and just like the sound of it feels, you feel that. And it's so impactful. So I think that, yeah, this movie, like the ending of it, that's one thing I will say. Again, I can't keep bringing up Dune, but like Dune, just kind of the fight scene at the end, it's just like, okay, we just kind of need to have, it just kind of ends. I'm like, okay, I didn't really feel like there was a climax here. Whereas this one, it is just part one of the story. It does feel like, okay, this is an ending for a movie right here. This last scene is really important and impactful. And yeah, that's one thing that Peter Jackson, at least in these movies, like there's problems I have with the Hobbit movies and things that happen that, because I feel like they did need to try and put a lot of filler in, because it was supposed to be one movie, then 2 movies, then 3 movies. So they just happen to have more filler. But this one, it was clearly from the start supposed to be 3 movies. He had this plan set out and all the beats hit.
One thing I think is so unique about Lord of the Rings is all the symbolism within the movie. and all the stuff you can take out of the movie.
Yeah, definitely.
How did you feel like the movie kind of talked about evil, power, corruption, addiction? I felt like those were all served really well within the movie with the ring itself.
Yeah, no, and that kind of touches back, like with that's a lot more Gollum in the second and the third one. He's not really in this one. It really hits with like Frodo, it's just starting to kind of like how he's getting this and how, power being this ultimate evil corrupting force and how, people start out with good intentions. Have like a ring race that talks about how they were these great kings of men, but then they were given this chance of power. It corrupted them and they went through this process that just made them into these specter. They're not even human anymore. They're not even really alive anymore. They're just kind of like hollowed out things, and how you can start with the good intentions, like the ring race did, like Boromir does. He's very well intentioned. Like even Frodo, you start to see him be corrupted, or you see how Bilbo, it was how hard it was for him to give up the ring. Gandalf's like, whoa, no, get that thing away from me. Like, I know that this thing will like mess me up. You see Aragorn's very afraid to do that. So I think that like these movies are very much good at saying like, hey, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah. One thing I thought was kind of weird though was with the whole Fellowship of the Ring throughout the movie while we're going on these characters' journey with Frodo, everyone, even the great Gandalf, can't resist the ring. From the 2-3 times I watched it here not that long ago, Frodo never seemed to like get into that evil. Like it just didn't seem to affect him like it did everyone else. Do you agree with that?
I think he's definitely a lot more resilient, like he is kind of like, okay, but you see it starting to get to him, I think, it's not so much in the first one. It starts to, though. You can tell I think he has that moment. I want to say it's in the first one where he like is kind of just like looking. No, it's the second one. Sorry, but he's like looking at the ring and like Sam kind of catches him just like staring at it, and you see him start to relate a lot. And this is going more and more in the second, third, because he's just in the first step of this here, where he's like pretty resilient. He's more resilient than most people, and I think they kind of hint that like hobbits are kind of this. He has this spirit that people don't give him credit for, that people don't give any credit for, that Boromir and all these other people don't have, where they would not necessarily be able to resist the ring. You see Kate Blanchett as Lady Galadriel. She's like, oh, it's such a trial for her to resist it. Frodo eventually, even he is corrupted by it by the end. Spoiler for the third one, like he doesn't give it up at the end. He's like, the ring is mine. He's not able to ultimately, be selfless and give the ring up. It does eventually even corrupt Frodo, the most like, kind-hearted person. That weighs on him, and that I think that's really the reasons why in the third one there is that whole extended scene at the end where this guilt of not being able to give up the ring and how it did corrupt him.
I haven't seen the second or third one in so long, so I'll have to sometime go back and rewatch those. It's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because while I said this is a movie that does stand on its own,
right,
it is just a piece of this larger epic,
Yeah. Was there a scene at all that like struck to you the most in the whole movie?
Honestly, it is that last scene. Everything just starts to go wrong. You have the Uruk-hai attacking them. It's a great battle scene, but it also is just like a really, really good scene between these characters. The end of Boromir's journey, you have him trying to redeem himself and protect these people. You have Merry and Pippin. They kind of like are like, we got to give Frodo time to get out of here. You have Legolas being a badass and shooting everyone with arrows. And I think that scene just really just does everything cool. It is such an interesting character scene while also being a really, really great battle scene.
Last scene you were talking about, were you talking about the scene where all the characters are just like having to put their temptations aside and just let Frodo leave so they don't accidentally kill him?
Yeah, exactly. They realized like, okay, the fellowship is broken. He's got to go to do this on his own. He can't go with him. We really want to go and help him, but there's nothing we can do. And then that moment where, Frodo's like, okay, I've got to do this alone. After this happened with Boromir, I know I can't really trust anybody. But then, Sam, ever loyal Sam, he's able to go with him. And you think for a second, like, oh man, he's going to drown. But Frodo, like, he puts his hand in and he saves him. And that's one thing this movie does really well too, is like show the power of friendship. I love movies where like male friendship is a really important thing, and I think it's become something that is not really seen in movies. I don't think it ever really has been a huge thing where it is male friendship is like as big as it is.
Oh, Stand By Me.
Stand By Me is another really good example. Yeah, every once in a while you get something like this or Superbad or something where it is about male friendship or just friendship in general. This movie, seeing Frodo and Sam, just like how much they care about each other and how much they mean to each other is a really cool thing.
Just how much of a loyal friend Sam is kind of moving in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that gets underrated in these movies is the acting in it. Like these movies, I think McKellen got nominated for this one, and I think that might have been it, like for the Academy Awards. Like, you know, everyone talks about how, but not a single nomination for acting in those movies.
That's crazy.
Like, how good is Vigo in this? How good is, Sean Bean? How good is Ian McKellen? How good is Cate Blanchett? Like, even Orlando Bloom is like, who's, like not the best actor, I don't think, but like he gives a really good performance as just kind of this weird stoic elf who just kind of has he's very, where he's just kind of like, is very, like, what's he looking at? Oh, what do you else I see? Legolas, like, Gimli's hilarious. John Rhys Davies, like really across the board. I think that's one thing that people do not talk about enough when they talk about these movies is how good these actors are. Like, sure. Absolutely great performances. And, I think it rightly so put Vigo on the map, and it put a lot of people on the map. I mean, Sean Astin's been a famous character actor for a while, but I think this is a movie that, he probably should be and is remembered for the most. Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan, they're these great comedic relief characters, but they also you feel for them. They have this great bond too, just like Sam and Frodo do within themselves, and then all four hobbits together, so they play off each other really well. And it's because I think they took the time to really develop these characters to really put out these great performances.
That's why I feel like if more times than not, if you're passionate about a story you're working on or writing, it's going to show it through what you create. I feel like more times, not all the time.
Yeah, sometimes you will get these passion projects that aren't great, but I will take a passion project over a cynical cash grab any day of the week. I love the movies where it's clear that the creator really, really cared about it, where it is something that they really are invested in. Like I was talking about the recent Matrix movie recently. Have you seen it?
Part of me refuses to see it because I'm pretty pissed off with what it's about, and that Lawrence Fishburne, Hugo Weaving aren't going to be in it. Like, without Morpheus, without Agent Smith, what's the point of the Matrix? Like, I'm done. Neo already died, but they're going to bring him back, and then the characters that didn't die are supposedly dead. That doesn't make sense.
and yeah, that's the thing. Exactly. It's kind of like this movie didn't need to get made. They were going to make it regardless. And there's a line in it, like Neo's a video game designer in the movie, and they're like, Warner Brothers is going to make us make a fourth one, and if we don't do it, someone else will. So it's like, okay, so that's why I think it was it Lana Wachowski got dragged back into it? I can't remember if it was Lana or Lily who worked on it, but like she got dragged back into it, and clearly didn't really want to, but kind of got dragged along. So I felt like the passion wasn't there, and I feel like the same thing happened with the Hobbit movies. Is when these creators just kind of get dragged back and the passion isn't there, the results are not the same, as when they are clearly this is like a labor of love for them, like this one was.
That's why I got so upset with M. Night Shyamalan's Glass. I know that movie's old now, but when that movie Glass came out in 2019, I think it was, I'd never been more excited for a movie in my life because I loved Unbreakable, I loved Split, and I loved Samuel Jackson, and I loved Bruce Willis, and I was so excited to see the two actors work together, and had so many versions of the movie playing in my head. And you go watch it, and it was clear that he had no passion in what he was making in it.
That's also why I'm really excited for the new Indy 5, because they announced that James Mangold, who's a director I really like, is making it and not Spielberg. So because I feel like that was one of the problems with number 4 is that Spielberg kind of his heart wasn't in it, but he's like, well, I got to make it another indie movie. And as much as I love Spielberg, and I love I even like the 4th indie movie, I would much rather see somebody who is really, really passionate and really still cares, where it feels like Spielberg, he would just be kind of doing it just to be like, okay, well, I've got to keep making these indie movies. But they're like, no, let's get somebody who's really passionate about this. And I think James Mangold is the absolute perfect fit for that. Same thing with Batman movies. I'm really excited to see Matt Reeves' take on it, rather than, just if Ben Affleck had just been kind of forced to do his Batman movie that he didn't really care about. So yeah, this I think you are absolutely right about the passion thing.
So are they not doing the Batman with Robert Patterson anymore?
Yeah. Robert Pattinson, he's still gonna star in it. Matt Reeves is gonna direct it, so I'm really excited
Okay.
for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really not sure how that movie's going to be since it's the first R-rated Batman movie ever made. Like, I kind of expect there's going to be
Is
a
it gonna
lot
be
of,
rated R? I thought it was
yeah,
gonna be. Oh, okay, that's okay.
no.
I didn't know
So
that. That's
it's
cool.
going to be the first R-rated Batman movie of ever made, and
Mhm.
R-rated superhero movies have gotten really popular since Deadpool and other movies. But I kind of expect, since Batman is a hero that a lot of kids look up to, I kind of wonder how parents are going to react to the movie.
Yeah, because I think it probably won't be as much of a kids movie. I mean, I think Matt Reeves is the right person for the job. I do think that sometimes studios take the wrong idea when like something does well. Like Deadpool was a rated R superhero movie, it did really well. So they're like, oh, we just got to make more rated R superhero movies. It's like that movie wasn't good because it was rated R. It's good because it was did
Yeah.
all these different things. But I think Matt Reeves is someone who is enough of a person who is like, I can make these big budget action movies within his studio system and still have my own creative voice. So
But
I'm very excited to see his take.
a lot of kids watch Batman movies, and so I'm just kind of curious because I'm sure there's going to be kids that are going to want to see it. I imagine anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
I'm just I'm curious how it's going to like explode, or maybe not be explode, and I'll be surprised.
it's definitely going to be a different kind of Batman movie than the ones that we've gotten in the past. But that's the one thing that's cool about Batman is there's so many different iterations of him that you can have the Affleck version, you can have the Keaton version, you can have the Christian Bale version, and they all feel like they are Batman while also being very different characters.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, or you feel like we covered everything on it?
Well, I mean, honestly, I could probably just keep talking for for days and days about Fellowship. So I probably do need to cut it off at some point because I do think we definitely hit on a lot of really really good points about it. A lot of the kind of things that make it such an iconic film, and I think I will say that it does a really good job of setting up this trilogy of it being like the first steps. And one thing that I think that is maybe underrated is it is the beginning of a story and they know where they're going. And not to say that like everything needs to be meticulously planned out, but that's one thing that I think that the Star Wars sequels ran into problems with, for example, is that, they didn't really know what they were going to do. And it kind of ended up like being a little bit clunky at the end. While also, I mean, look at the Star Wars prequels; they knew what they were doing, and those movies are kind of a mess too. So it still it manages to both be like, okay, we're gonna save some stuff for later. We're gonna not have these huge battles that are gonna have in the second or the third one, but it still manages to stand on its own while setting up everything, and that's a very very tough balancing act to pull off that they did well.
I want to thank you for your time. And is there anything you'd like to review in the future together?
I'm always down to come on and talk about movies. So I don't know. I've got a million movies I'd love to talk about. So, I mean, maybe we could probably shoot some ideas back and forth. I'll be down to come back, though.
Make sure you subscribe to my friend Derrick McDuff on Instagram. And thank you, Derrick.
Thank you. Yeah. And if you guys want to check out my podcast, Underrated too, that would be a really big deal. We talk about movies there, too.